I'm not letting your poor family humiliate my son at his own wedding." My fiancé's mother sneered, blocking the bridal suite door while clutching a prenup like a death sentence. Outside, security was turning my parents away for being too poor for her aesthetic. In 2 hours, the world expected a fairy tale. Instead, I was about to turn this altar into a crime scene and throw the groom out with the trash. My name is Quinn Reyes, and right now standing in the center of a bridal suite that smells of imported lace and old money, I am trying to convince myself that I am not suffocating. I am 31 years old. I am wearing a custom Vera Wang gown that costs more than the house I grew up in, and I am currently watching 3 makeup artists hover around my face like a bomb squad trying to defuse a live wire. "Just breathe, honey," one of them whispers, dabbing a sponge near my tear duct. "You're going to ruin the setting spray." I try to inhale, but the corset is a vice grip around my rib cage. It is designed to make me look statuesque, but it feels like it is trying to squeeze the working class out of my body. Just get through today, I tell myself. That has been my mantra for the last 6 months. Just get through the rehearsal. Just get through the photos. Just get through the ceremony. Once I say I do, once I am officially Mrs. Colin Ashford, the judgment will stop. The whispers will stop. I will go on. That is the lie I am feeding myself when the double doors of the suite swing open. Ella Ashford does not walk. She glides. My future mother-in-law is a vision in champagne silk. Her posture so rigid she looks like she has a steel rod replacing her spine. She is 60, looks 40, and has eyes that could freeze boiling water. Behind her trails the wedding planner, a nervous woman named Sarah, who is clutching her clipboard like a shield. Elaine does not look at me. She looks at the room. She inspects the lighting, the flower arrangements, the champagne bucket. Then, finally, her gaze lands on me. There is no warmth. There is no "you look beautiful." There is only the clinical assessment of an asset manager checking a portfolio. "Clear the room," Elaine says. Her voice is soft, but it carries the weight of a gavel strike. The makeup team evaporates. They know who pays the invoices. Within 10 seconds, it is just me. The terrifying silence of Ravenwood Estate and the woman who thinks I am a genetic error in her family tree. "We have a situation at the gate," Elaine says, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on her skirt. "A situation?" I ask. My heart does a nervous flutter against the bond of my dress. "Is it the paparazzi?" Collins said security handled the press. "It is not the press, Quinn. It is the guests." Elaine walks over to the window, looking down at the manicured lawns where 500 of Chicago's financial elite are currently sipping cocktails. She turns back to me, her expression bored. "I had to instruct the head of security to enforce a strict dress code at the perimeter. We cannot have people wandering onto the estate looking like they just finished a shift at a canning factory. It upsets the aesthetic." My stomach drops. "What are you talking about? Where did you stop?" "Some people claiming to be your relatives," she says, examining her manicure. "The loud ones. I am from Indiana, driving that rusty truck that looks like a tetanus shot waiting to happen." The air leaves the room. "My parents. You stop my parents. And not letting your poor family humiliate my son at his own wedding." She sneers. The mask slips just for a second, revealing the pure, unadulterated disgust underneath. "This is not a backyard barbecue in Maple Falls, Quinn. This is a merger of empires. The governor is here. The board of directors is here. I will not have your father in his polyester suit and your mother in her clearance rack dress wandering around the background of the official photographs like hired help. They are my family." I managed to choke out. My hands are shaking. "I invited them. They are on the list, and I took them off," Ella replies calmly. "They can watch from the overflow parking lot. We set up a screen. It is generous considering before I can scream, before I can rip the veil off my head and strangle her with it." My phone buzzes on the vanity table. I grabbed it. It is a video call from Lena, my younger sister. I accepted the call. The screen fills with Lena's tear-streaked face. The background is not the lush greenery of Ravenwood. It is asphalt, harsh sunlight, and the chain-link fence of the service entrance. Lena is sobbing, the sound distorting over the connection. "Quinn, they won't let us in." The guard said our names aren't on the iPad. Dad is trying to argue with them, but they are threatening to call the police. They said we're trespassing. Mom is crying in the truck. When what is going on? I can see my father in the background of the video, his face red with shame, gesturing at a stone-faced security guard who is twice his size. My father, who spent 20 years fixing cars so I could go to college. My father, who bought a new suit for today, a suit he could not afford just to make me proud. I'm coming down, I tell Lena, my voice trembling. Do not leave. I am coming. You are going nowhere, Elaine says. She hasn't moved. She is blocking the door. I hang up on Lena, my fingers fumbling. Move, Elaine. I need to get my family. You need to fix your face. She counters. You look blotchy. I ignore her and dial Colin. He will fix this. Colin loves me. Colin is the CEO of Arcadia Freight Systems. He builds bridges. He connects people. He told me last night under the starlight that he would protect me from everything. The phone rings once, twice, declined. A text message pops up immediately. Can't talk bad. With investors, don't worry. See you at the altar. The heart emoji is white, hollow, empty. I stare at the screen with investors on our wedding day 10 minutes before the ceremony. He is busy securing our future, Elaine says, reading my mind. She gestures to the large flat screen television mounted on the wall above the fireplace. Turn it up. You should be proud. I grab the remote. The screen is tuned to a financial news network. It is a replay of a segment from last night, but the ticker at the bottom says, Breaking news. Arcadia merger imminent. There is Colin. He looks handsome, charming, the golden boy of Chicago tech. The interviewer is asking him about the company's brand identity. It's about transformation, Colin is saying to the camera, flashing that smile that made me fall in love 3 years ago. Arcadia takes things that are inefficient and broken, and we give them value. Just look at my personal life. He laughs, a practiced, self-deprecating sound. I mean, look at my fiancée Quinn. She came from nothing. Zero. A dying town in Indiana. She was scraping by when I found her. I didn't just give her a ring. I gave her a life. I refined her. That is what Arcadia does. We elevate the assets that nobody else wants. The interviewer nods, eating it up. From the trailer park to the boardroom, a modern Cinderella story. Exactly. Colin agrees. Without me, she'd still be waiting tables. It shows our investors that we can spot hidden value anywhere, even in the dirt. I feel the blood drain from my face. In the dirt, I am not his partner. I am not the love of his life. I am a marketing strategy. I am the before picture in his weight loss commercial of a life. Elaine walks over to the vanity and drops a thick cream-colored envelope onto the glass surface. The sound it makes is heavy. Final. The lawyer sent over an addendum to the prenuptial agreement, she says casually, as if she is discussing the dinner menu. Counsel advises that you sign it before you walk down the aisle. If you don't, the wedding stops right now. I look at the envelope, then I look at Elaine. We already signed a prenup months ago. We updated it to reflect current risk factors. She taps the envelope with a manicured nail. Open it. Section 12. My hands are numb as I tear open the flap. I pull out the legal document. I scan the pages, my eyes blurring until they lock onto the bold text. Section 12. Reputational harm clause. In the event that the party of the second part Quinn Ray's or any member of her biological family of origin, causes public embarrassment, reputational damage, or social discomfort to the party of the first part, Colin Ashford or the Ashford estate, all marital assets shall be forfeited. It goes on. It gets worse. It essentially says that if my parents are too loud, if my sister wears the wrong dress, if I laugh too hard, or if we do anything that threatens the brand, I leave with nothing, not a dime. And worse, there is a subclause granting the Ashford family the right to use any media captured today as evidence of breach of contract. Sign it, Elaine commands, holding out a gold Mont Blanc pen. Then wipe your eyes. You have 5 minutes. The corset is crushing my lungs. I can feel the mascara burning the corners of my eyes. The room is spinning. Panic is clawing at my throat. screaming at me to run, to cry, to beg. But then something shifts. The panic hits a wall and bounces back as cold, hard clarity. I am not just a girl from Maple Falls. I am Quinn Raves. I am a senior risk assessment analyst at Bayshore Meridian Capital. My entire career is built on reading the fine print. I spend 60 hours a week analyzing contracts, digging through financial data, and spotting fraud in billion-dollar mergers. I find the rot in the foundation before the building goes up. For 3 years, I have been so blinded by the fairy tale, so desperate to believe that a prince really loved me that I forgot to do my job in my own life. I did not read the prospectus. I ignored the red flags. I let them treat me like a charity case because I thought it was the price of admission to happiness. I looked down at the document. Reputational harm. They think I am tracked. They think I am a scared little girl who will sign anything to keep the dream alive. They think they can lock my family out in the parking lot like stray dogs, and I will still say thank you for the scraps. Elaine is checking her watch. Door. She thinks she has won. I pick up the pen. My hand is not shaking anymore. If they want a risk assessment, I'm going to give them one. I turn slightly, looking into the mirror, but I'm not looking at my reflection. I am looking at you. Yes, you. Because I know you have been there. You have been the person who stayed quiet to keep the peace. You have been the one who swallowed your pride because they told you it was for the best. At that moment, standing in that overpriced room, I still thought the biggest tragedy of the day was being forced to choose between the man I loved and the family who raised me. I thought this was a heartbreak story. I was wrong. I didn't know that in less than 4 hours, the FBI would be raiding the buffet line. I didn't know that the very document Elaine just forced me to read would become the smoking gun in a federal investigation. And I certainly didn't know that by the time the sun went down, I wouldn't be tossing a bouquet. I would be watching my groom get walked out in handcuffs while I drank his champagne. Give me the pen, Elaine. I say, my voice steady. I'm ready. As I stare at the gold pen in my hand, the ink still wet on the nib, my mind does not stay in the room with Elaine. It snaps back. It rewinds 3 years to a rooftop terrace at the London House Hotel, 40 floors above the Chicago River. It was the 4th of July. The sky was exploding in bursts of red, white, and blue. Colin was down on one knee, holding a ring that cost more than my father made in 5 years. The diamond caught the strobe light of the fireworks, fracturing the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. I was crying. I was overwhelmed. I felt chosen. And then he said it. The sentence that I should have dissected right there on the spot. "Marry me, Quinn," he whispered, gripping my hand tight enough to leave a mark. "Let me take you away from all of that. I am going to protect you from that life of want forever. Protect me from that life." At the time, with the adrenaline and the champagne and the sheer spectacle of it all, I heard a promise of safety. I heard a man who saw how hard I had worked to crawl out of debt and wanted to give me a soft place to land. But looking back now, through the lens of this humiliations clause, I realized he was not proposing a partnership. He was proposing a rescue mission. I was a stray cat he had found in an alley, and he was patting himself on the back for bringing me indoors. The irony is sharp enough to cut glass. My job title at Bayshore Meridian Capital is Senior Risk Analyst. I spend 50 hours a week combing through merger acquisitions, reading 300-page prospectuses, and hunting for the single footnote that proves a CEO is lying about their revenue. I can spot a shell company in the Cayman Islands from a mile away. I can smell a bad debt ratio before I even open the spreadsheet. My entire career is built on the premise that people lie when there is money on the table. Yet, when it came to my own life, I did not just miss the red flags. I took them, sewed them together, and made a dress out of them. I grew up in Maple Falls, Indiana, a town that consists of 2 stoplights, a Dollar General, and a whole lot of pride. My father, Miguel, ran a garage out of our barn. He smelled permanently of motor, oil, and fast orange hand cleaner. He was the kind of man who would fix a neighbor's transmission for free because he knew they had just had a baby, then come home and eat rice and beans for a week to make up the difference. My mother, Roser, managed the night shift at a 24-hour diner. Her perfume was a mix of stale coffee and bleach. They were tired people. They were honest people. But in Colin's world, they were not people at all. They were a cautionary tale. I remember the first time the families met. It was an engagement, dinner at a French bistro in the Gold Coast neighborhood. My parents drove 3 hours in my dad's Ford F-150i, the one with the primer patch on the passenger door. They walked into the restaurant looking terrified, clutching a bottle of wine that I knew cost $12 at the grocery store. Elaine did not even stand up to greet them. She sat there draped in cashmere and offered a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a smile that stopped at her teeth. "Mr. and Mrs. Raised," she said, leaving the wine bottle untouched on the edge of the table, like it was contaminated evidence. "It is so touching that you managed to make the trip. Colin told me gas prices are up again. I hope it wasn't a hardship." My dad puffed out his chest, adjusting his tie. "We would drive across the country for Quinn." "Then, of course you would," Elaine murmured, taking a sip of her Pinot Noir. "Survival instinct is a powerful thing." Later, when the photographer came to take a group shot, Elaine maneuvered us like chess pieces. She placed herself and Colin in the center. She pushed my parents to the far edges, partially blocked by a large fern. "Just a tip for the wedding," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she leaned toward my mother. "Try to stick to neutrals, beiges, grays. We don't want you wearing anything too bright. You would hate to disappear into the background because you clashed with the cream decor." I froze. I opened my mouth to say something, to tell her that my mother looked beautiful in teal, but Colin's hand landed on the small of my back. He squeezed gently. "She doesn't mean it like that, babe," he whispered in my ear later as we drove home in his Tesla. "Mom is just from a different generation. She cares about aesthetics. It is her love language. She just wants us to look perfect for the press release." She treated my dad like he was the valet. I argued, "You are being sensitive." Colin said, his voice smooth, reasonable, calm. "You are projecting your own insecurities about money onto her. She loves you. She is just particular." I swallowed the anger. I told myself he was right. I told myself I had a chip on my shoulder because I grew up worrying about the electric bill. I gaslit myself into believing that being insulted was actually just being welcomed into high society. But the flags kept coming. They were small, manageable things. There was the time Colin joked about the paperwork. We were lying in bed on a Sunday morning, and he traced the line of my jaw with his thumb. "You know, when we get closer to the date, the lawyers are going to have a stack of stuff for you to sign," he said lazily. "Just standard stuff protecting the shareholders. You know how it is. Since you are marrying the brand, not just the man." "I read contracts for a living, Colin," I teased, kissing his palm. "I will bring my red pen." He had pulled his hand away just for a second. "Oh, you don't need to lawyer up on me, Quinn. It is boilerplate. Trust is the foundation of this marriage, right?" Then there was Naomi Carter, my best friend since freshman year of college, who works in cybersecurity and trusts absolutely no one. She was the only person who refused to drink the Kool-Aid. 2 months ago, we were sitting in her loft drinking cheap beer. I was complaining about the sheer volume of paperwork Elaine kept sending over: vendor contracts, liability waivers for the venue, non-disclosure agreements for the florists. "You read the prospectus for the merger of two pharmaceutical giants last week," Naomi said, staring at me over the rim of her glass. It was 300 pages. "You found a tax loophole on page 212. Yet you barely glanced at your own prenup. It's standard." "Nay," I defended, feeling defensive. "It protects his family's trust. I don't want his money." "It is not about the money. It is about the leverage," Naomi said. She set her beer down with a sharp clink. "Love is a zero-day exploit, Quinn. It bypasses your firewall and gives a bad actor root access to your system. You are looking at him and seeing a husband. I am looking at him and seeing a man who is legally insulating himself from you like you are a radioactive isotope." "He loves me," I insisted. "He loves that you look good on a press release," Naomi countered. "There is a difference." I was angry at her for weeks. I thought she was jealous. I thought she was cynical. But the moment that should have stopped the wedding happened 3 weeks ago. I was at the Ashford estate for a final dress fitting. The house was quiet. I was walking down the hallway toward the library to show Elaine the veil I had chosen. The door was cracked open just an inch. I heard Elaine's voice. It was sharp, professional, stripped of the fake warmth she used when the cameras were rolling. "I don't care if it seems excessive, Arthur," she was saying into the phone. "I want the termination trigger to be absolute. If there is a scandal, I want stock protection, immediate divestment." I paused, my hand hovering over the mahogany wood. Termination trigger. That was corporate speak for firing an executive. "The morality clause needs to be ironclad," she continued. "We can't have her baggage dragging down the IPO price. If the stock dips below $50 a share because of some trailer park drama, I want the marriage voided and the assets frozen." My breath hitched. Her baggage. She looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a split second, she looked like a wolf caught in a henhouse. Then the mask slammed back into place. She hung up the phone without saying goodbye. "Quinn," she exclaimed, her face brightening into that terrifying, perfect smile. "Darling, come in. I was just speaking to the caterer about the lobster bisque. We were worried it might be too heavy for a summer afternoon. What do you think?" I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew what I had heard. I knew what a morality clause was. I knew what termination trigger was. "I thought I heard you talking about stocks," I said slowly. Elaine waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, just boring board stuff. Never mind that. Let me see the veil. Is it French lace?" I let it go. I let her change the subject. I let her guide me over to the mirror and coop over the tulle. I told myself I had misunderstood. I told myself she was talking about an employee or a vendor or a business partner. Standing here now looking at the reputational harm clause in black and white, I realized I was right. She was talking about a business partner. She was talking about me. All those moments, the dinner, the dress code, the jokes, the phone call weren't just personality quirks of a difficult mother-in-law. They were architectural drawings. They were building a cage. They wanted the optics of the humble, beautiful wife to sell their merger narrative, that they wanted the legal ability to eject me the second I became inconvenient. They didn't want a marriage. They wanted an acquisition with a return policy. I looked at the signature line on the document. I looked at my own reflection in the mirror. The panic is gone, replaced by a cold, burning rage. It starts in my stomach and spreads to my fingertips. I have spent my whole life trying to be good enough, trying to scrub the scent of motor oil off my skin, trying to prove I belonged in their boardrooms and their ballrooms. I thought if I followed their rules, if I signed their papers, if I kept my family quiet and in the background, they would finally respect me. But you don't get respect from people who think they own you. You only get respect when you show them that you are dangerous. I uncap the pen. The tip hovers over the paper. I am going to sign this not because I agree to it, but because this document is the final piece of evidence I need to prove that this entire wedding was a setup. It proves coercion. It proves intent. Elaine thinks she is closing a deal. She has no idea she is handing me the murder weapon. "You made the right choice, Quinn," Elaine says, watching the ink flow onto the paper. "It is just business." "Yes," I say, finishing the signature with a flourish. I hand the document back to her and meet her eyes. My voice is steady, calm, terrifyingly polite. "It is just business." I check the time on the delicate diamond watch Colin gave me, a bribe disguised as a gift. It is 1:00 in the afternoon. The ceremony starts in an hour. That gives me 60 minutes to burn their empire to the ground. It was 2:00 in the morning on the night before my wedding, and the silence in my hotel suite was loud enough to break glass. I was lying in a king-sized bed at the charming boutique hotel just down the road from Ravenwood Estate, staring at the ceiling. My body was exhausted, but my brain was running a marathon on a treadmill of anxiety. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elaine's cold smile. Every time I tried to drift off, I heard the way Colin had dismissed my father's concerns about the parking arrangements during the rehearsal dinner. "It is fine, babe. You are overthinking it." That was his favorite phrase. "You are overthinking it." I rolled over and grabbed my phone from the nightstand, intending to scroll through Instagram until my eyes burned enough to force sleep, but there was a notification sitting on the lock screen. It was an email that had arrived 4 minutes ago. The sender was Sparrow Proton Mail. No domain I recognized, no name I knew. The subject line was typed in all caps. "Read this before you say I do." My thumb hovered over the delete button. My first instinct was that it was spam or maybe some twisted prank from one of Colin's frat boy groomsmen who thought sending cryptic messages to the bride was high comedy. But then the preview text caught my eye, chilling my blood faster than the air conditioning venting directly onto my skin. "Check section 12 of your prenup." I sat up. The duvet fell to my waist. That was not spam. That was specific. That was targeted. I unlocked the phone and opened the email. There was no body text, just two attachments. One was a PDF file named Updated Agreement, Final Signed PDF. The other was an audio file labeled Meeting 06 to 12 Wave. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tapped the PDF. It loaded slowly on the hotel Wi-Fi, the little spinning wheel mocking my rising panic. When it finally popped onto the screen, I recognized the font immediately. It was the prenuptial agreement Colin's lawyers had sent over 3 months ago. I remembered that day. I was in the middle of a chaotic merger at work. A junior associate from the firm had dropped off a stack of papers on my desk during my lunch break. Standard updates. MS. Raise, he had said, sweating slightly in his cheap suit. Same as the draft you reviewed. Just some formatting changes and clarifying language regarding the estate trust. Colin already signed. I had flipped through it. It looked thick. It looked boring. And because I was so desperate to prove I wasn't after his money, because I wanted to be the cool girl who didn't make a fuss, I had signed the last page without reading every single clause. I scrolled down now, my fingers trembling. Section 1, Section 2, Assets, Liabilities. I stopped at Section 12. Section 12, Reputational Harm and Family Conduct Clause. I zoomed in. The legal jargon was dense, but I read contracts for a living. I translated it in real time, and the translation made me sick. In the event that the party of the second part, that was me, or any member of the party of the second part's biological family, defined herein as family of origin, causes public embarrassment, reputational damage, or social discomfort to the party of the first part, that was Colin or the Ashford estate, all marital assets shall be forfeited. It went on. It detailed that if this clause was triggered, I would lose any claim to alimony. I would lose any claim to the house. I would lose my vested stock options in Arcadia. And, most terrifyingly, subsection B stated that the Ashford family reserves the right to utilize any media, recorded or live, of said incidents as evidence in arbitration. They had built a trapdoor under my feet. If my dad got drunk, I lost everything. If my mom wore the wrong dress and the press mocked her, I lost everything. If I reacted to their insults and caused a scene, I lost everything. I felt like I was going to throw up. But then I saw the second attachment, the audio file. I checked the volume on my phone and pressed play. There was the sound of a door closing, then the rustle of papers. "The stock is oversubscribed," a man's voice said. It was Trevor, Colin's best friend and CFO. "But the investors are skittish about the valuation. They think we are inflated. That is why the wedding is critical." Elaine's voice cut in sharp and distinct. "We need the narrative to hold the reformation of the playboy, the stability of a family man. It softens the edges of the aggressive expansion strategy." Then Colin spoke. "Don't worry, Mother. The narrative is solid. Gwen is the perfect prop. She is grateful. She is naive. She looks at me like I hung the moon. And her family," Elaine asked, "they are a liability. If they show up looking well, like themselves, it could spook the European partners." There was a pause. Then Colin laughed. It was not the warm laugh I knew. It was a cold, dry sound. "Let them come," Colin said. "In fact, let them be natural. If they embarrass themselves, let them. If they get loud, let them. The internet will do the rest. We will have the sympathy vote." Poor Colin trying to elevate everyone around him. But you can't take the trash out of the trailer park. And if they really mess up, the morality clause kicks in. We divorced 6 months post-IPO. I keep the capital and she walks away with nothing but her maiden name. It is a win-win. The recording ended. I stared at the phone. The silence in the room was different now. It was not empty. It was heavy. It was pressing down on me, crushing the air out of my lungs. The perfect prop. A win-win. I did not cry. I think I was in too much shock to cry. Instead, I dialed Naomi. She picked up on the first ring. It is 2:00 in the morning. Quinn, either you are having cold feet or you need me to bury a body. Which is it? You were right, I whispered. My voice sounded jagged, like it was scraping against my throat. Naomi, you were right about everything. I was blind. I didn't read the contract. Where are you? Her tone shifted instantly from sleepy sarcasm to military alert. The hotel, room 412. Don't move. Don't call him. And 20 minutes out. She made it in 15. When Naomi burst into the room, she didn't look like a bridesmaid. She looked like a hacker going to war. She was wearing a black hoodie and carrying a heavy-duty tactical backpack. She locked the door behind her, threw the bag on the bed, and pulled out a laptop that looked like it could launch a missile strike. Show me, she said. I forwarded the email to her secure server. She cracked her knuckles and started typing. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, the screen reflecting in her glasses. Okay, she muttered, her eyes scanning lines of code. First things first, who is Sparrow? I am tracing the header information. She paused, hitting the enter key with force. Well, this is interesting. But I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, hugging my knees. The email didn't come from a hacker in Russia. Naomi said it came from a static IP address, specifically a secure node. She turned the laptop toward me. It originated from the internal network of Arcadia Freight Systems. Someone inside the building sent this. Someone with high clearance. A whistleblower or a conscience. Naomi said, look at the other files in the directory they linked. Sparrow didn't just send you the prenup. They gave us the keys to the kingdom. She clicked on a folder I hadn't noticed before. It was labeled IP Orosho Internal. Wayne, look at this spreadsheet. Naomi pointed to a column of numbers. You analyze risk for a living. Tell me what you see. I leaned in, my eyes adjusting to the glare. It was a revenue report for Arcadia's logistics division. I scanned the rows. Cargo shipments, fuel costs, vendor payouts. Wait, I said, frowning. This doesn't make sense. They have listed a payment of $4 million to a vendor called North Star Logistics for shipping containers in June. But look at the incoming revenue in July. $4 million coming back in from a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Polaris Holdings. Naomi finished for me. It is round-tripping. I breathed. The realization hit me harder than the breakup audio. They are sending money out to a fake vendor, then bringing it back in as revenue to inflate their earnings report. It makes the company look more profitable than it is. And here Naomi clicked another file, chat logs from the executive Slack channel. Look at what Trevor wrote. I read the message. We just need to window dress the Q3 numbers until the IPO hits. Once we go public and the cash flows in, we can backfill the holes. As long as the stock price holds for the lockup period, we are golden. This isn't just a bad marriage, Quinn. I said, my voice shaking. This is securities fraud. This is a federal crime. They are pumping up the value of the company using fake numbers so they can cash out when they go public. And here, Naomi looked at me, her expression grim. Are the distraction. The wedding is the shiny object they are dangling in front of the investors to keep them from looking too closely at the books. Look at the happy, stable CEO. Look at his charity case wife. It is all a show. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the night was pitch black. The expensive estate, where I was supposed to get married in a few hours, was just a shadow in the distance. I felt like a fool, a stupid, naive fool who had fallen for a smile and a sad story about a lonely billionaire. I had let them turn my life into a marketing campaign. I had let them weaponize my family's poverty to sell their stock. I can't do it, I said. I have to leave. We have to wake up my parents and go. I can't walk down that aisle. If you run, Naomi said, her voice sharp, they win. They will spin it. They will say you got cold feet. They will say you were overwhelmed by the pressure. Or worse, they will say you found out about the prenup and wanted more money. Colin will play the heartbroken victim. The stock will go up out of sympathy, and you will be the villain of the week on Twitter. I turned back to her. So what do I do? Marry a felon. Read the last line of the email, Naomi said. I looked back at my phone. I scrolled to the very bottom of the message from Sparrow. If you choose to fight, do not confront them yet. Do not let them know you know. They are expecting a scared girl from Indiana. Do not give them that. Give them the risk analyst. Do what you do best. Gather evidence. I stared at those words. Do what you do best. For years, I had felt small in Colin's world. I felt like I was lucky to be there, like I was an imposter. But looking at that spreadsheet, looking at the clumsy way they were hiding their fraud, I realized something. They were arrogant. They were sloppy. They thought they were untouchable because they were rich. I wasn't the imposter. I walked back to the bed and sat down next to Naomi. I picked up the printed copy of the rehearsal schedule. Naomi, I said, my voice dropping an octave. It was no longer the voice of a crying bride. It was the voice I used when I had to tell a room full of investment bankers that their deal was garbage. Can we trace the metadata on these files to prove Colin accessed them? I can do better, Naomi grinned, cracking her knuckles again. I can mirror his phone to your laptop if he connects to the venue Wi-Fi tomorrow. Good, I said. And that audio recording, can we sync it to the speaker system at Ravenwood? Naomi's smile turned feral. Quinn, I can sync it to the International Space Station if you want. I looked at the time. It was 3:30 in the morning. The sun would be up in 2 hours. I am not going to run, I said. I am going to put on that dress. I am going to walk down that aisle, and I am going to let them think they have won. I will let them play their game right up until the moment they think they are safe. And then Naomi asked. And then I said, I am going to introduce them to Section 12. We relocated to Naomi's loft in Wicker Park. The hotel Wi-Fi was an open door, and Naomi insisted that if we were going to declare war on a tech conglomerate, we needed a fortress. By 3:00 in the morning, her living room floor looked less like a home and more like the inside of a chaotic mind. It was a sea of paper. We had printed everything, the prenup, the leaked spreadsheets, the chat logs. My entire relationship with Colin Ashford was spread out on the hardwood, dissected and pinned down under the harsh glare of track lighting. I moved through the mess with a highlighter in my hand and a cold mechanical precision in my chest. The crying was done. The risk analyst was clocked in. This is not a wedding, I said, my voice flat, stepping over a stack of vendor contracts. This is a money laundering operation, wearing a white dress. Naomi was sitting cross-legged by the server rack she kept in the corner, her fingers flying across 2 keyboards. It is worse than that. Look at the background check on Elaine. I knelt beside her. On the screen were a series of civil court dockets dating back 15 years. Most of them were sealed, redacted into useless black bars, but Naomi had managed to scrape the metadata from the clerk's archived index. Case number 402. Naomi Reed, plaintiff Vanessa Thorne, defendant Elaine Ashford. Cause of action, breach of promise and defamation. Vanessa Thorne, I repeated, the name triggering a vague memory. She was the daughter of that steel magnate. Didn't she date Colin in college? They were engaged, Naomi corrected, for 6 months. Then there was a leak to the press about her father's gambling debts. The wedding was called off. The engagement ring was kept by the Ashfords as compensation for emotional distress, and Vanessa signed a settlement that included a non-disparagement agreement so tight she probably can't even whisper Colin's name in her sleep. We scrolled down. There were 3 others. Different girls, different years, but the pattern was identical. An engagement, a sudden scandalous revelation about the bride or her family, a breakup where Colin played the victim, and a financial settlement that favored the Ashford estate. She doesn't have bad luck, I murmured, realizing the sheer scale of it. She has a business model. She finds women with assets or social cash, extracts value, and then hits the eject button before the ink dries on the marriage license. But you are different, Naomi pointed out, tapping a sticky note onto the floorboard. You don't have a trust fund to steal, so why you? Because I have a story, I said, looking at the printout of the brand narrative document Sparrow had sent. And in this market, a story is worth more than cash. Speaking of Sparrow, Naomi said, pulling up a spectral analysis of the audio file. I traced the device signature. The recording wasn't made on a phone. It was made on a dictaphone, the kind used for official meeting minutes. The serial number matches an inventory log from the Arcadia Finance Department. She hit a few keys, cross-referencing the checkout log. Assigned to Mason Reed, Chief Junior Accountant. My stomach turned over. Mason. I pictured him instantly, 24 years old, fresh out of Wharton with nervous eyes and a habit of chewing his cuticles. He was always the one who brought me water when I visited Colin's office. He was the one who looked at his shoes whenever Elaine walked into the room. A memory flashed back to me, sharp and sudden. 2 weeks ago, I'd have run into Mason in the lobby of Arcadia. He looked pale. He had started to say something, his hand gripping my arm a little too tight. MS. Raise. He had stammered. If I were you, I would read the appendices. I would read everything twice. At the time, I thought he was just being an awkward, diligent accountant, making small talk about diligence. I laughed and told him I read contracts in my sleep. He tried to tell me. I whispered. He was warning me. He is the whistleblower. Naomi confirmed. He is scared. Quinn, he knows they are cooking the books, and he knows that if he goes down, they will crush him. So he sent this to you. He is hoping you will blow the whistle so he doesn't have to. Let's look at the venue, I said, standing up and pacing. Why Ravenwood? Why today? Naomi projected a calendar onto the wall. This is the official booking log for Ravenwood Estate. You have the great lawn reserved for the ceremony at 4 in the afternoon. A look at the ballroom B and the library. I squinted. There was a separate booking running parallel to our reception. Event Arcadia Systems Private Investor Summit host Colin Ashford. They are holding a board meeting at my wedding. I said, the absurdity of it almost making me laugh. It is an investor road show. Naomi corrected. Think about it. The venue is packed with the wealthiest people in the Midwest. The press is there. The champagne is flowing. Colin gets to stand up, give a speech about family values and transformation, point to his adoring, grateful wife, and then walk into the library and sign term sheets for millions of dollars while the iron is hot. It is a theatrical performance, I said. I am not the bride. I am the opening act. But there was more. Naomi opened a file titled Plan B Crisis Mode. It was a timeline, a literal schedule of events for a worst-case scenario. 1:30 in the afternoon. Arrival of Rayer's family. Security to segregate to Zone C. 2:00 in the afternoon. Provocation protocols active. Open bar access denied to Rayer's party. 4:15 in the afternoon. If an incident occurs, PR team to deploy. Sympathy package to press contacts. 4:30 in the afternoon. Crisis PR meeting in the library. I stared at the block of time labeled Crisis PR meeting. It was scheduled. It wasn't a contingency plan for an accident. It was a scheduled slot on the itinerary. They weren't just worried my family might embarrass them. They were banking on it. They were actively engineering a situation where my father would get angry or my mother would cry just so they could capture on camera and use it to activate the morality clause. They want the scandal, I realized, my voice cold. If the IPO goes well, they keep me as a prop. If the numbers tank or if they get caught for fraud, they trigger the scandal. They blame the instability of my family for distracting the CEO. They dump me, keep the assets, and play the victim card to stabilize the stock price. It is evil, Naomi said, shaking her head. It is actually evil. It is efficient, I corrected. And it is sloppy. I walked over to my laptop. I logged into the Bshore Meridian Capital Secure portal. My hands were steady now. I wasn't Quinn the fiancé anymore. I was Quinn the auditor. I have access to the databases they use to file their quarterly reports, I said, typing in my two-factor authentication code. And now, thanks to Mason, I have their real internal numbers. I pulled up the official S1 filing Arcadia had submitted to the SEC, the document that claimed they were a solvent, rapidly growing unicorn. Then I pulled up Mason's spreadsheet on the other half of the screen. I started connecting the dots here. I pointed. Look at this revenue stream from a company called Apex Logistics. $3 million in Q1, $3 million in Q2. It accounts for 20% of their growth. Who owns Apex? Naomi asked, already typing. Nobody, I said. I am checking the incorporation records. It is a shell. No employees, no trucks. The address is a P.O. box in Delaware. I traced the wire transfers using the internal ledger Mason had sent. Arcadier sends $5 million to a consulting firm in Panama for market research, I narrated, following the money trail. That firm sends $4 million to a holding company in Ireland. That holding company pays Apex Logistics, and Apex pays Arcadier back for shipping services. Round-tripping. Naomi whistled. They are sending their own money around the world and bringing it back as revenue to make the company look busy. It is a Ponzi scheme with trucks, I said. Then the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place and the blood drained from my face. I opened my email sent folder, my work email. I searched for Arcadier. There it was, a due diligence report I had filed 6 months ago. At the time, Colin had asked me to take a quick look at their preliminary numbers just as a favor, just to give him confidence. I had written a glowing email to his board praising their efficiency. Oh my God, I whispered. But Naomi asked, looking up from her screen. I endorsed it, I said, pointing at the email. I used my professional credentials to vouch for their financial health. I didn't do a deep dive because I trusted him. I just looked at the summary he gave me. I turned to Naomi, my eyes wide. That is why he needed to marry a risk analyst. If this fraud is discovered, they won't just blame the CFO. They will blame me. They will say, look, even his wife, the senior analyst from Be Ashore, signed off on it. I am not just the prop. Naomi, I am the fall guy. If the SEC investigates, I am the one who looks like an accomplice. The morality clause wasn't just about taking his money back. It was about discrediting me. If I tried to testify against him, they would use the crazy, trashy family narrative to paint me as an unreliable witness, a gold digger who was bitter about the prenup. They had thought of everything. They had designed a machine to chew me up and spit me out, and they had disguised it as a fairy tale wedding. I walked to the large industrial window of the loft. The sky over Chicago was turning a bruised purple. The sun was about to rise on my wedding day. I held a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I looked out at the skyline, at the glittering towers of glass and steel, where men like Colin and women like Elaine moved pieces on a board, destroying lives without ever spilling a drop of their vintage wine. I accepted it then. The Colin I loved was dead. In fact, he had never existed. He was a character played by a con artist who needed a human shield. And Elaine wasn't just a mother protecting her son. She was the architect. She was the one who drew the blueprints for the cage. I took a sip of the bitter cold coffee. Naomi, I said, not turning around. Yeah, print it all. Make 3 copies. One for us, one for the lawyer, and one for the special agent, at the SEC. I watched the first ray of sunlight hit a skyscraper in the distance. I'm going to get dressed, I said. It is time to go to work. At 7 in the morning, the doorbell to Naomi's loft buzzed. That is the cavalry, Naomi said, not looking up from her monitors. Jordan Ellis walked in carrying 2 large coffees and looking like he had slept in his suit, which, knowing his reputation, probably cost more than my car. Jordan was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to burn a village down but make it look like an electrical accident. He specialized in high-conflict divorces and white-collar financial crimes, a Venn diagram that overlapped more often than people thought. I read the file you sent over, Jordan said, skipping the pleasantries. He threw the prenup onto the coffee table. It is vicious. It is nasty. If I had written it, I would be proud. But as a human being, it makes me want to vomit. Can we beat it? I asked, sitting on the edge of the sofa, my hands wrapped around a mug of black tea. Jordan took a sip of coffee and looked at me. The law is a double-edged sword. Quinn, this morality clause, it is technically legal. They can define reputational harm however they want. But here is the thing about contracts. They require good faith. If we can prove that they entered into this agreement with the specific intent to trigger the clause, that they are engineering the scandal, then it is not a contract. It is a conspiracy to defraud. They have a schedule, I said, pointing to the timeline pinned to the wall. They literally have a time slot for crisis PR meeting. Exactly. Jordan nodded. That is entrapment. It turns the prenup from a shield into a weapon, and judges hate it when people weaponize their courtrooms. I looked at the scattered papers. So what do I do? Do I just not show up? Do I grab my parents and drive back to Indiana right now? Jordan shook his head slowly. No, that is exactly what they want. Think about the narrative they have built. You are the poor girl, the charity case. If you run, their PR machine spins into motion. They will say, you got cold feet when the background checks got too deep. They will say you were after the money and panicked when the new prenup appeared. You will look guilty. Cullen will look like the heartbroken saint, and the stock price will probably go up out of sympathy. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. You can't run, Quinn. You have to walk into the trap, and then you have to spring it on them. Hair. Naomi spun her chair around with a digital tripwire. She pulled up a window on her main screen. It looked like a standard PowerPoint file. This, Naomi said, is the pitch deck for the Arcadia Investor Summit. I managed to acquire a copy from the server Access Sparrow gave us. I have made a few modifications. What kind of modifications? I asked. I embedded a passive tracking script in the metadata of the file, Naomi explained, her voice humming with the excitement of a hunter setting a snare. It is invisible. It doesn't change the slides, but the second anyone opens this file, it pings back to my server with the IP address, the geolocation, and the user credentials of the device opening it. And here is the kicker, Jordan added, a dark grin spraying across his face. We know they are planning to pitch investors at the wedding. That is illegal. You can't conduct unregistered security solicitation, especially not when you're cooking the books. If the CFO opens this file on the Ravenwood Wi-Fi network during the wedding reception, we have proof that they are conducting fraudulent business in real time. And that proof, Naomi finished, gets automatically forwarded to a secure Dropbox I have set up for the Securities and Exchange Commission. Jordan pulled out his phone. I know an agent at the SEC, Moniker Hale. She's been trying to nail a tech IPO for fraud for 2 years, but hasn't had a smoking gun. I am going to call her. I will tell her we have a tip about an unregistered investor summit happening at Ravenwood. I won't give her your name. I will just tell her if you get a ping from inside the house, you have probable cause to raid the party. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was the cold, calculating thrill of the counterattack. So I have to go through with it, I said quietly. I have to put on the dress. I have to say the vows. You have to be the perfect bride, Jordan said. You have to smile. You have to let them think they are in total control. You have to let them think they have won. Right up until the moment the feds knock on the door. I stood up. I can do that. I have been pretending to be okay in their world for 3 years. I can do it for 6 more hours. But there was one loose end, a legal one. I need to go to the county clerk, I said. Jordan raised an eyebrow. Why? Because, I said, grabbing my purse. I might be walking down the aisle, but I'm not getting married today. The office of the county clerk opened at 8:30 in the morning. I was the first person in line. The woman behind the glass partition looked tired. She held a lukewarm coffee and blinked at me. I must have looked insane. Jeans, a sweatshirt, no makeup, but with the frantic energy of a woman who had seen the future and decided to rewrite it. Can I help you? She asked. I need to withdraw a marriage license application. I said, the name is Quinn Reyes. The other party is Colin Ashford. She typed slowly. Date of ceremony. Today, I said. She paused and looked up at me. Today, honey. Usually people just don't turn in the signed license if they change their minds. You don't have to come down here. No, I said firmly. I want it canneled. I want it voided in the system. I want to make sure that even if a piece of paper with signatures on it shows up on your desk next week, it is legally worthless. She shrugged. All right. It is your right. Do you want me to notify the other party? Is that required by law? I asked, holding my breath. Nope. She popped her gum. Privacy laws. You are the applicant. You can pull it then. No, I said, don't tell him. Let it be a surprise. She stamped a form, the heavy thud echoing in the empty room like a gunshot. Done. You are single. MS. Raise. Have a nice day. I walked out into the morning sunlight. I took a deep breath. For the first time in a week, the air didn't feel like it was being rationed. I had just cut the legal cord. I was free now. Everything that happened at the altar would just be theater. My next stop was Ravenwood Estate. It was 9 in the morning. The florists were already setting up the arches. The catering trucks were unloading. It looked like a dream, but all I could see were the crime scene markers. I found Walter Witt, the owner of the estate, in his office. He was a silver-haired man who prided himself on the quiet elegance of his venue. He looked up, surprised to see the bride in sneakers 3 hours before hair and makeup. MS. Raise, he smiled. Everything is on schedule. The weather is holding up beautifully. Mr. Whitlow, I said, closing the door behind me, we need to talk about your liability insurance. His smile faltered. Excuse me. I have reason to believe that my fiancé intends to use your venue to conduct unregistered financial business during the reception. I lied. Well, half lied. I am concerned that if this activity attracts regulatory attention, it could reflect poorly on Ravenwood. I don't want your estate to be liable for his business dealings. Walter went pale in the world of high-end events. Regulatory attention was code for police raid. What are you suggesting? He asked stiffly. I want to sign an addendum to our venue contract, I said, pulling a document Jordan had drafted in the car. It states that all vendor payments for the event, the catering, the music, the security are guaranteed by me personally from an escrow account I have set up, not by Arcadia, not by Colin. Why? He asked, suspicious. Because if his assets get frozen today, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I want to make sure your staff still gets paid, and in exchange I want you to instruct your security team that they answer to me today. Not Elaine, not Colin. If I ask them to remove a guest, they remove the guest, regardless of who it is. Walter looked at the contract. He looked at me. He was a businessman. He understood risk. He saw a bride who was offering him a guaranteed paycheck in the middle of a potential disaster. He picked up his pen. I will inform the head of security immediately. The staff takes orders from the bride. Thank you, Walter, I said. You just saved your reputation. I drove back to the hotel to meet the hair and makeup team. My phone buzzed. It was my mother, Quinn. Her voice was small, worried. Dad is pacing around the room. He is worried about his suit. He says it looks too shiny. And I brought that blue silk dress, but I saw the pictures of the venue online and I don't know. Maybe I should just wear the gray one. It fades in better. I close my eyes. I could picture her standing in a Motel 6 room holding 2 dresses, terrified of embarrassing her daughter because some rich woman made her feel small. Mom, I said, yes, mija. Wear the floral one. I said, the one with the big red hibiscus flowers. The one you wore to Tia Sophia's party. But Quinn, she hesitated. It is so bright, Elaine said. I don't care what Elaine said. I cut her off, but my voice was gentle. Elaine is boring. I want you to look like you. I want you to be colorful. I want you to be loud. Are you sure? I am sure. I said, Mom, listen to me. Today is going to be interesting. People might be rude. They might try to make you feel out of place. But I need you to promise me something. Do not shrink. Do not apologize. If they stare, let them stare. You are the mother of the bride. You earned your seat at that table. Okay, she said, sounding a little stronger. Okay, Quinn, for you, I'll wear the flowers. I hung up. I didn't tell her the truth yet. I didn't tell her that her bright tacky dress was going to be the visual hook that made the Ashfords look like the least monsters on camera. I didn't tell her that her presence was the bait for the morality clause. I would explain later. For now, I just needed her to be herself. Back in the bridal suite, the chaos had begun. The makeup artists were unpacking their kits. The dress was hanging in the window, a ghostly silhouette of white lace. Naomi was there pretending to steam the veil, but I saw the Bluetooth earpiece in her ear. She gave me a subtle nod. The trap was set. The script was live. Monica Hale at the SEC was on standby. I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I leaned over the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were clear. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard resolve of a woman who had realized she was the only person coming to save her. I practiced the words in the mirror. I watched my lips move. I am not letting your poor family humiliate my son. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I am not kicking my family out, I whispered to my reflection. I am kicking the groom out. I straightened up. I unlocked the door. It was showtime. The rehearsal dinner was a masterclass in dissection, and for the first time in my life, I was the best actor on the stage. I moved through the crowd in a cocktail dress that cost $2,000, a glass of sparkling water in my hand that I pretended was champagne. My face was a mask of bridal radiance. I hugged cousins I had never met. I accepted compliments from women who looked at my engagement ring with calculating eyes, assessing its carat weight before they even made eye contact with me. I leaned into Colin's touch, letting him kiss my temple for the photographer while my mind was running a constant cold surveillance log. Subject Colin Ashford, pulse steady, behavior performative, threat level critical. To the untrained eye, this was a celebration. To me, it was an evidence-gathering expedition. I had a high-fidelity recording app running on the phone clutched in my left hand. Naomi had rigged it to upload to her cloud server in real time, just in case someone decided to confiscate my device. I saw Elaine Ashford signal the matri. She did it with a subtle flick of her wrist, the kind of gesture that implied absolute authority. She led him toward a quiet alcove near the service entrance. I excused myself from a conversation with a bored venture capitalist and drifted toward a large floral arrangement of white hydrangeas that stood between me and Elaine. I turned my back to them, pretending to check my makeup in a compact mirror, but I'd angled the microphone of my phone toward the gap in the foliage. The seating chart for the reception needs a final adjustment, Elaine was saying. Her voice was low, smooth, and venomous. Of course, Mrs. Ashford, the matri replied. What changes do you require? The Race family, she said, saying my last name like it was a medical condition. Currently, they are at tables 4 and 5. That is too central. I want them moved to tables 19 and 20. 19 and 20, ma'am. Those are behind the structural pillars. They are right next to the kitchen swing doors. They won't be able to see the head table. Exactly. Elaine purred. We have a videography team coming in to film the toasts for the investor reel. I do not want them in the shot. They are visual clutter. Just make sure they are fed and kept out of the frame. If they complain, tell them it is for acoustic reasons. Understood. I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck, but I forced it down. I didn't storm over there. I didn't throw my drink in her face. Instead, I tapped the screen of my phone, timestamp marked 7:14 in the evening. I walked away. Visual clutter. That was what she called my father, a man who had worked 12-hour shifts on concrete floors to buy me my first laptop. That was what she called my mother, who had taught me how to read before I started kindergarten. I made my way toward the bar. The room was filled up with Colin's inner circle, the frat brothers turned finance bros, the guys who wore loafers without socks and talked about the market like it was a fantasy football league. Trevor Lang, the CFO of Arcadia and Colin's best man, was holding court near the ice sculpture. He was already 3 scotches deep, his tie loosened, his face flushed with the arrogance of a man who thinks he owns the world. Naomi was hovering nearby. She was dressed in all black, holding a DSLR camera with a massive lens. She had convinced the actual wedding photographer that she was a second shooter hired by the bride for candid shots. In reality, she was filming everything in 4K resolution. I caught Naomi's eye. She tilted her head toward Trevor. I moved closer, keeping a polite smile plastered on my face. It is a lock. Boys, Trevor was saying, sloshing his drink. The S1 is filed. The road show starts tomorrow right here in the library. By Monday morning, the bell rings and we are all retiring to sit. Bart's. What about the audit? One of the groomsmen asked nervously. I heard the SEC is sniffing around the logistics numbers. Trevor laughed. It was a loud barking sound. The SEC is asleep at the wheel. They are understaffed, and overworked. By the time they figure out how we structured the round-trip revenue, we will have already cashed out the initial offering. If everything blows up 6 months from now, who cares? We will be on the boat. The company can burn, but our personal accounts will be offshore. The shutter on Naomi's camera clicked rapidly, capturing the look of smug satisfaction on his face. I knew the microphone on her camera was sensitive enough to pick up a whisper from 20s T away. She had him. We had the CFO on tape admitting to premeditated securities fraud and intent to dump stock. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see Mason Reed. The young accountant looked like he was going to be sick. He was clutching a glass of soda water so hard his knuckles were white. When he whispered, he looked around nervously to make sure Elaine wasn't watching. "Mason," I said, keeping my voice bright and loud enough for passers-by. "So glad you could make it. Are you having a good time?" He leaned in, bypassing the pleasantries. "Did you get the email?" I stopped smiling. I looked him dead in the eye. "I got it. I sent everything I could find," he murmured, his eyes darting to Trevor across the room. "The dual ledgers, the chat logs, the shell company registrations. I can't do anything else. Quinn, if they find out it was me, they will ruin my career. They will sue me into oblivion." "They won't," I said softly, "because where they are going they won't have access to their lawyers." He looked at me confused for a second, and then he saw the coldness in my eyes. He realized I wasn't the victim he thought I was. "Don't sign anything else," he warned, "no matter what they put in front of you." "I won't," I promised. "Thank you, Sparrow." He flinched at the code name, then nodded once and disappeared into the crowd. I needed a moment. The air in the ballroom was thick with expensive perfume and the stench of moral rot. I excused myself and headed for the ladies' room. I walked into the restroom, intending to splash cold water on my face, but as I reached for the handle of the stall, the main door opened and two voices drifted in. I froze. I recognized them. It was Sarah and Jessica, two of the bridesmaids Elaine had insisted I include in the wedding party. They were cousins of Colin, girls who had grown up in boarding schools and probably didn't know how to pump their own gas. I stepped quietly into the stall and locked it, lifting my feet slightly so they wouldn't see my shoes. "God, did you see the dress her aunt is wearing?" Jessica's voice echoed off the marble tiles. "It looks like something you'd buy at a gas station." "It is tragic," Sarah agreed, the sound of lipstick being applied accompanying her words. "The whole family looks like extras in a debt relief commercial. I don't know how Colin does it. I mean, Quinn is pretty in a rustic sort of way, but having to deal with that baggage, I would rather die. He is a saint. Jessica said he is doing it for the image. You know, the whole Prince Charming rescuing the peasant vibe. It tests well with the middle-class demographic, but honestly, I give it a year. Once the IPO is done, he will cut her loose. He has to. She doesn't fit. Totally. Did you see her trying to eat the escargot? It was painful." They laughed. It was the cruel, careless laughter of people who have never had to work for anything. I stood there in the dark stall a day ago. This would have crushed me. I would have sat on the toilet lid and cried until my eyes were puffy. I would have believed them. I would have felt ashamed of my aunt's dress and my own lack of sophistication. But tonight, I just felt numb. I pulled out my phone and texted Naomi. Restroom audio. Timestamp 7:45. To Bridesmaids Market. I waited until they left before I walked out. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look rustic. I looked dangerous. I returned to the ballroom just as the speeches were starting. Elaine was tapping a spoon against her crystal champagne flute. The room fell silent. "Welcome, everyone," Elaine said, standing at the microphone with the grace of a queen addressing her subjects. "We are so delighted to share this intimate evening with you before the big event tomorrow." She turned her gaze toward me. It was a spotlight of pure condescension. "You know, when Colin first told me he was bringing a girl home from Maple Falls, I admit I was concerned," she said, giving a little self-deprecating laugh that invited the audience to share in her classism. "We Ashfords have a certain way of doing things, a certain pace, and I wasn't sure if Quinn would be able to keep up." There was a ripple of polite laughter. I saw my mother stiffen at her table in the back. "But," Elaine continued, "we believe in charity. We believe in opening our doors to those from very different, very difficult backgrounds. And we hope that the Reyes family feels comfortable enough tonight to learn from us, to see what is possible when you have the right guidance. She raised her glass to guidance and to knowing your place in the legacy. To legacy, the room echoed. It was a slap in the face disguised as a toast. She had just called my family a charity case in front of 200 people. I saw Colin smiling and nodding, accepting the narrative. He didn't look at me. He was looking at the investors, gauging their reaction. They looked pleased. The story was working. The benevolent billionaire and the lucky poor girl. Naomi was at the AV table at the back of the room. She was ostensibly adjusting the focus for the slideshow of childhood photos that was playing on the big screen behind Elaine. I caught her eye. She gave me a thumbs up. She wasn't just adjusting the focus. She had just finished installing a hardware keylogger and a streaming bridge into the presentation laptop. Anything that was projected on that screen tomorrow, including the illegal pitch deck, would be mirrored directly to the SEC evidence locker. The dinner wound down around 10:00. The guests began to drift back to their cottages and hotel rooms. I said my goodbyes, playing the part of the exhausted but happy bride. "Get some rest," Colin said, kissing me on the cheek. He smelled of scotch and mints. "Big day tomorrow. Don't stay up late reading." "I won't." I lied. "I'm going straight to bed." I waited until midnight. The estate was quiet. The security guards were patrolling the perimeter, but I knew the shift change was at 12:15. I slipped out of my cottage wearing black leggings and a dark hoodie. I wasn't the bride anymore. I was the shadow. I made my way to the main house, to the library. This was the room Arcadia was using as their deal room. It was where Trevor and the finance team had set up their temporary headquarters. The door was locked, but the key was under the mat. They were arrogant. They thought they owned the place. They didn't think anyone would dare break in. I slipped inside. The room smelled of old books and fresh toner. A bank of laptops sat on the mahogany conference table, their little lights blinking in the darkness. I found Trevor's laptop. It was the one with the sticker of the Arcadia logo on the lid. I didn't need his password. Naomi had given me a USB drive that would bypass the login screen and mount the drive as external storage. I plugged it in. The screen flickered to life. My heart was pounding in my throat, a rhythmic thudding that sounded like a war drum. If security walked in right now, it was over. I would be arrested for corporate espionage. The wedding would be off, but I would be the one in handcuffs. Focus Quinn. I navigated to the desktop. There it was, a folder named Investor Summit Final. Inside was the PowerPoint file, Arcadia Pitch Ravenwood Wedding. I inserted the second USB drive, the one with Naomi's payload. I dragged the file over, replaced the original with the tripwire version Naomi had coded, and deleted the traces of the transfer. It took 30 seconds. It felt like 30 years. I pulled the drives out. I wiped the trackpad with the sleeve of my hoodie to remove prints. I stood there for a moment in silence. The mini fridge in the corner hummed. Outside, a cricket chirped. "It is done. Tomorrow." When Trevor stood up in this room to pitch to the investors, he would open that file, and the moment he did, he would be sending a digital flare to the federal government that said, "Here we are. Come and get us." I slipped out of the library and walked back toward the great hall. I didn't go back to my cottage immediately. Instead, I walked into the empty ballroom where the reception would be held. It was ghostly in the moonlight. The tables were set with white linens. The crystal glasses sparkled in the dim security lighting. The dance floor was a vast, empty expanse of polished wood. I stood in the center of the floor, imagining the scene tomorrow. I could see two versions of the future. In one version, I walked down the aisle, signed the papers, and became Mrs. Colin Ashford. I would live in a bait house. I would be rich. I would spend the rest of my life swallowing insults from Elaine and watching Colin launder money. I would slowly disappear until Quinn Reyes was gone and only the prop remained. In the second version, there was smoke. There was the wail of sirens. There was the look of absolute shock on Elaine's face when the illusion shattered. There was my father standing tall in his cheap suit, watching his daughter burn down a kingdom of lies to protect her dignity. I looked at the heads where Colin and I were supposed to sit enthroned like chairs. I choose the sirens, I whispered to the empty room. I turned on my heel and walked out into the night. The rehearsal was over. The real show was about to begin. We snapped back to the present, into the suffocating reality of the bridal suite. The air conditioning was humming, but the room felt like a kiln. My sister, Leaner, was still on the screen of my phone, her face pixels of distress against the backdrop of the asphalt parking lot. She was crying, her mascara running, while a security guard in a dark suit stood behind her with his arms crossed, looking like a bouncer at a club that had reached capacity. "Quinn, please." Leaner sobbed, her voice cracking through the tiny speaker. "Mom is scaring me. She's just sitting on the curb. She won't speak. Please tell them to let us in." I looked up from the phone to the woman blocking the door. Ella Ashford stood there, immovable, her expression devoid of anything resembling empathy. She held the new addendum to the prenuptial agreement against her chest like a shield. "Tell them to leave, Quinn," Elaine said, her voice perfectly level. "Save yourself the embarrassment. If they leave now, nobody has to know they were turned away. We can just say they had a travel emergency." I looked at the document she had thrown onto the vanity. The reputational harm clause was bad. But as I turned the page, my eyes locked onto a new paragraph, a fresh edition that the lawyers must have drafted overnight. Section 15. Non-operation and confidentiality. In the event of any regulatory inquiry, audit, or criminal investigation involving Arcadia Freight Systems or the Ashford estate, the party of the second part agrees to maintain absolute confidentiality and refuses to cooperate with any external agency, including but not limited to the SEC, IRS, or DOJ unless compelled by a court order. Any voluntary cooperation will be deemed a breach of contract, resulting in immediate forfeit of all marital assets and liability for damages estimated at no less than $50 million. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy. This was not a prenup. This was a gag order. This was an obstruction of justice contract wrapped in a wedding ribbon. They knew the investigation was coming. They knew the house of cards was wobbling, and they were trying to legally bind me to silence before the first subpoena hit the desk. "You want me to sign away my right to speak to the police?" I whispered, my voice trembling. This time the tremble was real. It was the physical manifestation of pure rage. "I want you to be a loyal wife," Ella corrected, stepping closer. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and old money. "Colin is under a lot of pressure. The market is volatile. We need to know that the person sleeping next to him isn't going to run to the press or the government every time the stock dips. It is standard for high-profile couples." "It is obstruction," I said. "It is insurance," she snapped. "Sign it, or the wedding is over right now. I will walk out there, take the microphone, and tell 500 guests that you are a gold digger who refused to sign a standard agreement. I will ruin your reputation before you even take off that dress." My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of Jordan's advice. Don't blow up. Don't let them see the shark. Be the minnow. If I fought her now, she would cancel the wedding. The investors would go home. The illegal pitch deck in the library would never be opened. The SEC would lose their probable cause to raid the estate. The trap would fail, and Colin would get away with everything. I had to surrender, or at least I had to look like I was surrendering. I dug my fingernails into my palms until I felt the sharp bite of pain. I forced my breathing to hitch. I let the tears that had been threatening to fall all morning finally spill over. "Please," I choked out, dropping my phone onto the plush carpet. I slumped onto the ottoman, burying my face in my hands. "Please don't do this, Elaine. I love him. I can't live without him." I heard the rustle of silk as Elaine moved. I peeked through my fingers. Her posture had softened, not out of kindness, but out of satisfaction. The predator had seen the prey limp. "I don't care about the money," I sobbed, looking up at her with wet, bleeding eyes. "I will sign anything. Just please don't cancel the wedding. I can't handle the shame. My family were so proud." "Then fix it," Elaine said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. She held out the pen again. "Show me that you prioritize this family over that rabble outside." "I will," I promised, my voice thick with fake desperation. "I will tell them to go. I will tell them I don't want them here. Just promise me Colin won't be mad." Elaine let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh, honey, Colin won't even notice. He is focused on the future, and frankly, it is better this way. I have seen girls like you before. You think you can straddle two worlds, but you can't. You have to choose. And frankly, those people, she gestured vaguely toward the window, they are anchors. We are cutting the rope so you can float. I sniffled, wiping my nose with the back of my hand. You are right. You are right. I need to be in Ashford. Good girl, she said. She placed the document on the vanity table, smoothing out the creases. Now dry your face. You look blotchy. I will send the makeup artist back in. Wait, I said, grabbing her wrist gently. Can I just have 10 minutes, please? I need to call my mother and tell her to leave. It is going to be hard. I don't want anyone to hear me doing it. I need to say goodbye to them. Elaine looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. Fine, 10 minutes. But if you are not ready when I come back, I am sending the security team to physically remove them. I will be ready, I whispered. Elaine turned and walked out, the train of her dress swishing behind her. The heavy door clicked shut. The second the latch clicked, my sobbing stopped. It was like flipping a switch. I sat up straight, grabbed a tissue, and dabbed the tears carefully so I wouldn't ruin the foundation. I reached for my phone on the floor. I hadn't just dropped it. I had propped it against the leg of the vanity, the camera lens facing upward, recording the entire interaction. I stopped the recording and hit play. The video was angled low, but the audio was crystal clear. Those people, they are anchors. We are cutting the rope so you can float. And before that, sign it, or I will ruin your reputation. Coercion, duress, and a direct admission that she was isolating me from my support system. It was perfect. I quickly opened the encrypted messaging app Naomi had installed on my phone. I uploaded the video to the secure cloud. I typed a message to Naomi. Phase 1 complete. She took the bait. How is the reception committee? 3 seconds later, a reply popped up. Naomi SEC team is parked in a utility van 2 miles down the service road. Monica is eating a donut and waiting for the ping. The second Trevor opens that file in the library. They roll. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The pieces were moving. Then I opened a new message to Jordan, my lawyer. Quinn, I am about to sign a document that forbids me from talking to the government. If I sign it under duress and with the intent to expose a crime, am I liable? Also, if I say exactly what they did into a microphone later, is it defamation? Jordan was fast. Jordan truth is an absolute defense against defamation. As long as you stick to the facts and show the documents, you are safe. As for the prenup, sign it. A contract to commit or conceal a crime is void ab initio. It is not worth the paper it is written on. Plus, we have the duress on tape now. Go ahead, give them their autograph. I set the phone down. I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at me didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like a soldier in white satin. I reached into the hidden pocket of my bridal clutch, a small velvet bag Naomi had given me the night before. I pulled out a heavy black fountain pen. It looked exactly like the expensive Mont Blanc Elaine had left on the table. The weight was the same. The gold banding was the same, but the ink in this pen was a special chemical compound Naomi had sourced from a spice shop in Berlin. It was a deep, rich blue when it hit the paper, but upon exposure to oxygen, the pigment would break down. Within 4 hours, it would fade to a faint yellow smear. Within 6 hours, it would be invisible. I picked up the real Mont Blanc and slipped it into my clutch. I placed Naomi's pen on the table. Then I dialed my mother. Mom, I said when she answered. I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice this time. Quinn, we are still outside. The guard is staring at us. I know, Mom. Listen to me very carefully. I am going to send someone down to get you. Not the front gate. Go to the side entrance near the delivery bay. Tell the guard that Walter Whitlow authorized your entry. If he gives you trouble, tell him to call Walter directly. When what is happening? She asked. Should we just go home? No, I said fiercely. Do not go home. You are coming inside. You are sitting in the front row. And Mom, when you see me walk down that aisle, I want you to know that I'm not doing this for them. I am doing this for us. Okay, meet her, she whispered. We trust you. I hung up. I checked the time. My 10 minutes were up. The door opened. Elaine swept back in, followed by the makeup artist and the photographer. "Is it done?" she asked, looking at the vanity. "It is done," I said softly. "I told them to leave." "Good," she said. "And the papers?" I sat down at the vanity. I picked up the pen. Naomi's pen. I opened the document to the last page. My hand hovered over the signature line. I thought about the years of subtle insults. I thought about Colin laughing about his charity case. I thought about the fake revenue and the shell companies. I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed dark and smooth. Quinn Rates. I signed my name with a flourish. I dated it. I handed the document to Elaine. She scanned the signature, her eyes gleaming with victory. She folded the contract and slid it into the envelope. "See," she said, patting my cheek. Her hand felt cold. "That wasn't so hard. You just secured your future. One day you will thank me for helping you grow up." She turned to the photographer. "All right, let's get some shots of the bride putting on the final touches. We need her to look radiant. We need to sell the fairy tale." She walked out of the room, clutching the envelope like a trophy. She thought she was holding the deed to my life. She didn't know she was holding a blank piece of paper. I sat back in the chair. The makeup artist rushed forward to touch up my powder. "You look beautiful, sweetie," she said nervously. "Are you ready?" I reached for my engagement ring, which was sitting in a velvet box on the table. The diamond was huge, heavy, and cold. I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. "I am ready," I said, my voice steady and low. I stood up. The heavy satin of the dress settled around me. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of lilies and impending destruction. "I am going to go say I do," I whispered to the empty room. "But tonight he is going to wish I hadn't." The music began. It was Pachelbel's Canon in D, played by a string quartet that probably cost more to hire for the hour than my father made in 6 months. The melody floated over the manicured great lawn of Ravenwood Estate, signaling the start of the performance. I stood at the top of the stone staircase, gripping my bouquet of white orchids like a weapon. My father, Miguel, stood beside me. He tugged at the collar of his rental tuxedo. It was a little too loose in the shoulders, and the fabric had that distinct synthetic sheen of a garment that had been worn by 100 other men before him. "You look expensive, mijer," he whispered, squeezing my arm. His hands were rough, calloused from decades of scrubbing grease and changing tires. They were the only real thing in this entire zip code. "I feel heavy, Dad," I whispered back. Down below, the guests were turning in their seats. I saw the sea of designer hats, pastel suits, and faces that had been pulled tight by surgeons. And then I saw the splash of color that Elaine had tried so hard to erase. My family was there. I had told the head of security, a man named Henderson, that if my parents were not seated in the front row within 5 minutes, I would lock myself in the bathroom and the groom would be standing at the altar alone. Henderson, knowing who was actually signing his paycheck, thanks to my earlier meeting with Walter Whitlow, had overruled Elaine's orders. There they were. My mother was wearing the dress, with the big bright red hibiscus flowers beside the muted creams and grays of the Chicago elite. She looked like a firework. My cousins were grinning, eyes wide as they took in the sprawling estate, completely oblivious to the fact that half the people around them looked at them like they were an invasive species. Elaine was seated in the front row on the groom's side. I saw her stiffen when she saw my mother. She turned her head slightly, whispering something to the woman next to her, probably an apology for the visual pollution, but I didn't feel the shame she wanted me to feel for the first time in my life. Looking at my father's weathered face and my mother's defiant flowers, I felt a surge of fierce, burning pride. They had survived without lying. They had loved without contracts. "Ready?" my dad asked. "Ready." I lied. We began to walk. The grass was soft under my heels. The aisle was lined with thousands of white roses. As I took each step, the last 3 years played in my head like a highlight reel of microaggressions. "Step, you are so articulate for someone from that background," a board member had told me at a gala. "Step, we can pay for your parents to stay at a hotel in the city." Colin had said before a dinner party, "The house is just a little crowded tonight." "Step, I am saving you, Quinn." I am pulling you out of the mud." I looked at Colin standing at the altar. He looked like a magazine cover. His tuxedo was bespoke. His hair was perfectly coiffed. He was smiling at me with that dazzled, loving expression he had practiced in the mirror. It was the face of a man who thinks he has pulled off the perfect heist. I reached the altar. My dad kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Colin's. Colin's palm was dry, full, confident. "You look breathtaking," he whispered loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. The officiant, a Bishop Elaine had flown in from New York, began the ceremony. He spoke about destiny, about 2 worlds colliding to create a new universe. It was a script written by a PR team. Then it was time for the vows. Colin went first. He pulled a piece of heavy cream-colored card stock from his pocket. He cleared his throat, looking deep into my eyes, but pitching his voice to the cameras at the back of the aisle. "Quinn," he began, his voice thick with manufactured emotion, "when I found you 3 years ago, you were fighting so hard just to survive. You were a flower growing in concrete. I promised you then that I would transplant you to a garden where you could finally bloom." A few guests in the audience chuckled softly. It was a charming metaphor to them. "I vow to protect you," Colin continued. "I vow to keep you safe from the life you left behind. I vow to show you the world, to give you the stability you never had, and to be the rock that lifts you up from where you started. You are my greatest investment, and I promise to always take care of you." He lowered the card, wiping a single perfect tear from his eye. The silence that followed was heavy. Even in this crowd, the condescension was thick enough to choke on. I saw an older investor in the second row frown and shift in his seat. Greatest investment. It was too on the nose. Then it was my turn. I didn't have a card. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had turned my life into a spreadsheet. "Colin," I said. My voice was clear. It carried over the wind. "People talk about fairy tales. They talk about the prince rescuing the girl, but they never talk about what happens after the rescue. They don't talk about the price of the ticket." Colin's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "This wasn't the script. I vow to be the wife you deserve," I said, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. "I vow to pay attention to the details, the fine print, and the things that are often hidden in the shadows. I vow to stand by you in truth, not in fiction. And I vow that no matter what happens, no matter how the markets change or the fortunes turn, I will always ensure that everyone gets exactly what they are owed." Colin blinked. He looked confused, but he recovered quickly, squeezing my hands. He thought I was being poetic. He didn't know I was talking about an audit. Cut to the library at Ravenwood Estate. While I was promising to settle debts, Trevor Lang was in the library just 100 yards away. He was pacing, holding a glass of scotch, waiting for the signal to start his presentation to the private group of investors who had slipped away from the ceremony early. He sat down at the mahogany desk and opened his laptop. He plugged in the HDMI cable connected to the large screen hidden behind a painting. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Showtime." He double-clicked the file named Arcadier Pitch Ravenwood Wedding PPTX. The file opened on the screen. The Arcadier logo spun into view. Trevor didn't see the background process that triggered instantly. He didn't see the packet of data that shot out from the laptop, bypassing the local firewall and hitting a server in a loft in Wicker Park. Cut to the back of the ballroom. Naomi was standing behind the AV console, disguised as a technician. Her laptop was open, hidden under a pile of cables. A green light flashed on her screen. Target acquired. File opened. User Tang admin. IP address 192.16.8.1.105. Ravenwood secure. GPS 42.2458 DN 87.89 228,920 to Deborah. Naomi didn't smile. She just tapped a single key. Forward to Ceci Dropbox. Cut to a black utility van parked on the service road. Monica Hale sat in the passenger seat, surrounded by empty coffee cups and surveillance monitors. Her phone pinged, a high-pitched urgent sound. She looked at the screen. The log file had arrived. It was the smoking gun, proof that Arcadier was conducting unregistered securities business using fraudulent numbers. Live from the venue, she picked up her radio. Her voice was calm, professional, and deadly. We have the ping. The package is open. Execute the warrant. I repeat, execute the warrant. All units move in. Behind her, two unmarked SUVs roared to life. The gravel crunched under their tires as they sped toward the main gates of Ravenwood, back to the altar. The bishop cleared his throat. If there is anyone here present who has just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence stretched. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak trees. I looked out at the crowd. I looked at Elaine, sitting there with her chin raised, looking triumphant. I looked at my parents who were watching me with so much love it made my chest ache. I could stop it now. I could turn around, shout, I object, and tell everyone that he was a fraud. I could run down the aisle, grab my mom's hand, and drive away before the police arrived. But that wasn't justice. That was just an escape. If I stopped it now, they would spin it. They would say I was crazy. They would say I was overwhelmed. They would keep their money, their reputation, and their freedom. No, I needed the ring on my finger. I needed the contract signed. I needed them to believe wholly and completely that the trap had worked. I needed them to feel the victory so that the fall would break their bones. I looked back at Colin. I do, I said, and in the silence of my own mind I finished the sentence. I do commit to burning this entire life to the ground. And do you, Colin, take Quinn to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Colin said, his voice ringing out with the confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. Then, by the power vested in me, the bishop beamed, raising his hand. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Colin leaned in. His lips touched mine. It was a kiss for the cameras. It was perfect. It was cold. The guests erupted in applause. Elaine stood up, clapping politely, her eyes already scanning the crowd for the investors. We turned to face the audience. I smiled. It was the brightest smile I had ever worn. They cheered for the happy couple. They cheered for the merger. They cheered for the fairy tale. None of them knew that yesterday morning at the county clerk's office I had voided the marriage license. None of them knew that technically, legally, and officially I was still Quinn Ray's, and the man holding my hand wasn't my husband. He was just a mark. We walked back down the aisle, roses crunching under our feet, walking straight toward the reception hall where the champagne was chilling and the federal agents were loading their weapons. We did it, babe, Colin whispered in my ear, squeezing my hand tight. You are finally safe. Yes, I said, not looking at him. I finally am. The reception was staged like a coronation. The ballroom at Ravenwood was a blinding expanse of white hydrangeas cascading from the ceiling, white silk linens draping the tables, and a 5-tier white cake standing in the corner like a sugary monument to capitalism. It was beautiful in the way a sterile operating room is beautiful. I moved through the room, not as a bride, but as a narrator in a play that was about to have a very violent third act. I watched the guests file in. There were the venture capitalists in their Italian suits, checking their phones for stock updates. There were the socialites in pastel dresses, their faces pulled tight, scanning the room to see who was sitting where. And then, huddled in the back near the kitchen doors, was the cast of characters Elaine Ashford wished she could edit out of the script The Ray's Family. My aunt was trying to make herself small in her chair. My cousins were looking at the silverware like it was a puzzle they couldn't solve. My father sat with his hands on his knees, staring straight ahead, refusing to look at the people who were whispering about his suit. I was sipping a glass of sparkling water, watching everything when I saw Elaine make her move. She glided over to the DJ booth, a young man with an undercut who looked terrified of her. She leaned in, placing a hand on his shoulder. It looked affectionate, but I knew that grip. It was a claw. I moved closer, pretending to adjust my train, and listened. We are running behind schedule, Elaine said, her voice smooth. We need to cut the father-daughter dance. Just skip right to the speeches. If the bride asks, tell her we lost the track. But ma'am, the DJ stammered. It is on the run of show. Cut it, she commanded and walked away. I waited 5 seconds. Then I walked up to the booth. Hi, I said. The DJ jumped. Mrs. Ashford, give me the tablet, I said, extending my hand. He handed it over. I scrolled to the timeline. I didn't just add the dance back in. I highlighted it in red. I typed a note in all caps. Must father-daughter dance. Non-negotiable is skipped. No payment. I handed it back to him. Play the song, I said, and if she comes back, tell her the bride outranks the mother. He nodded, swallowing hard. It was a small victory, a petty little act of rebellion, but it felt good. It felt like a warm-up. I continued my patrol. I walked past the tables, smiling, nodding, playing the part, but my eyes were scanning the service. I noticed a waiter pouring wine at table 2, where the partners from Goldman Sachs were sitting. He was pouring from a bottle of Chateau Margaux, expensive, heavy. Then I watched another waiter approach table 19, my family's table. He held a different bottle. It had no label, just a generic foil top. He poured a splash into my uncle's glass. I stopped a waiter as he passed me. "Let me see that bottle," I said, pointing to the cheap one. He hesitated. "Ma'am, the bottle," I repeated. He showed it to me. It was a $1.10 table wine, the kind they used for cooking in the back. "Why are tables 19 and 20 getting this?" I asked. "This Ashford's instructions," he whispered, looking down. "She said the reserve list was for the priority tables only. She said the other guests wouldn't know the difference." I felt a cold shiver of rage travel down my spine. It wasn't about the wine. It was about the calculation. She had itemized the guests. She had decided that my family's palates were not worth the good vintage. It was a line item in her budget, cost of feeding the poor relations. "Keep pouring it," I said, my voice icy. "I want the evidence on the table." I walked toward the head table. Colin was standing in the corner with Elaine and 3 men I recognized from the Arcadia board. They were huddled together, creating a wall of black tuxedos. I slipped up behind them. "The soft circle is tight," Colin was saying, checking his phone. "We are oversubscribed by 30%. The buzz from the wedding is already hitting the forums. People love the humble Rhodes angle." "It is working," Elaine agreed, touching her pearls. "The photos of Quinn walking down the aisle are trending. The Cinderella of Chicago. The retail investors are eating it up. We will open at $1.40 a share on Monday and the lockup period," one of the board members asked. "Standard," Colin said, "but we have the offshore accounts ready for the secondary offering. Trevor is handling the transfer details in the library right now." They laughed. They clink-kicked their glasses. They were discussing felony securities fraud at my wedding reception. 5 FT away from the woman they were planning to frame for it. I walked away before I vomited. "Everyone take your seats," the DJ announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "It is time for the toasts." I sat down next to Colin at the head table. He put his hand on my thigh, squeezing it possessively. "Are you doing okay, babe?" he asked. "You look a little intense." "Just taking it all in," I said. "It is a lot to process." Trevor Lang, the best man, grabbed the microphone. He was swaying slightly. His face was flushed. He had clearly enjoyed the Chateau Margaux. "Hello, hello," Trevor yelled. "For those who don't know me, I am Trevor. I am the CFO of Arcadia, and I am the guy who has had to bail Colin out of jail in Mexico twice." Laughter, polite, rippling laughter. But seriously, Trevor continued, leaning against the podium. "I remember when Colin first told us about Quinn. He brought her to the club for the first time. And you guys, it was adorable. She showed up in this little polyester dress and she didn't know which fork to use for the salad. She literally picked up the oyster fork and tried to eat her steak with it." The room roared. It was a cruel, mocking sound. I looked at my family. They weren't laughing. My dad was staring at his plate. My mom was biting her lips so hard I could see a drop of blood. "But that is the beauty of it," Trevor shouted, raising his glass. Colin didn't care. He saw a project. He saw potential. He cleaned her up. He taught her how to dress. And look at her now. She looks like she was born here. To Colin, "The best renovation project of the year." To Colin, the crowd shouted. Colin laughed, shaking his head with fake modesty. He squeezed my thigh again. "He is just drunk. Honey, don't take it personally." "I am not," I said. "I am taking it as testimony." Then it was Elaine's turn. She stood up. The room went silent, out of respect or fear. She adjusted the microphone stand. Thank you, Trevor, she said, her voice dripping with maternal warmth. And thank you all for coming. She turned to look at me. It was the look a scientist gives a lab rat. As a mother, Elaine began, you always worry about who your son will choose. You want someone who fits, someone who understands the weight of this family's legacy. And I admit, when Colin brought Quinn into our lives, it was a culture shock. She paused for effect. A few people chuckled. Quinn comes from a world that is very different from ours, Elaine continued. A world of simplicity and struggle, and it has been our responsibility as the Ashford family to guide her, to mold her, to make sure she doesn't feel overwhelmed by expectations she was never raised to understand. She gestured toward the back of the room, toward table 19. And to the Ray's family, she said, her voice dropping to a patronizing coo, we are so glad you could be here today. We know this environment can be intimidating. We hope you feel comfortable. We hope you feel welcome. And we all hope, she paused, smiling a tight warning smile, that you feel comfortable enough not to do anything dramatic tonight. The air left the room. It was a direct threat masked as a joke. It was a reminder. Sit down. Shut up. Don't embarrass us. This was it. This was the moment. Suddenly, from the back of the room, Naomi shouted, "Oh no!" She ran out from behind the AV booth, waving her hands. The slideshow. The file is corrupted. It is frozen. The screen behind Elaine flickered and went black. I need 5 minutes to reboot the system, Naomi yelled to the DJ. Give the bride the mic. Let her stall. The DJ, panicked and remembering my earlier threat, immediately cut the music and walked over to the head table. He thrust the microphone into my hand. Mrs. Ashford, he pleaded, just say something while we fix it. I stood up. The spotlight hit me. It was blindingly bright. I could feel the heat of it on my skin. I looked out at the room. I saw the faces of the investors waiting for me to say something charming and grateful. I saw Colin looking up at me, a little annoyed but confident that I would play my role. I saw Elaine sipping her wine, thinking she had just delivered the final blow, and I saw my parents. My dad looked up. He looked tired. He looked defeated. I gripped the microphone. My hand was steady. Thank you, I said. My voice boomed through the speakers. It was not the soft, chicky voice of the girl from Maple Falls. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 10 years in boardrooms telling CEOs they were bankrupt. Trevor is right, I said, smiling a dangerous smile. I didn't know which fork to use. I didn't know that you aren't supposed to wear red to a winter wedding. I had a lot to learn. I walked around the table. I stepped out onto the dance floor. I was center stage now, but I learned fast. I continued. I learned that in this world, appearance is everything. I learned that you can dress up a lie in a tuxedo and people will applaud it. And I learned a little story about how we treat the poor family of the bride. The room went deadly silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. I turned to face Elaine. You see, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that was somehow louder than a scream. When I arrived today, I thought the most important thing was love. But then I was reminded by my new mother-in-law that actually the most important thing is protecting the brand. I saw Colin stand up. Quinn, he said, his voice low. What are you doing? I ignored him. I looked directly into the camera lens that Naomi was pointing at me. So, since we are all sharing stories, I said, I think I should share one of mine. It is a story about a contract, a lockup period, and a little clause called Section 12. I would like to introduce you to the people sitting at table 19, I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational. Please, Mom, Dad, Leaner, stand up. My family hesitated. My dad looked terrified, clutching his napkin. My mom looked at me, confused, but they trusted me. Slowly, awkwardly, they stood up. The spotlight swung from me to them, illuminating the cheap polyester of my dad's rental suit and the bright red flowers on my mother's dress. This is Miguel Reyes, I said, gesturing to my father. He is a mechanic. Last winter, when the town nurse's car broke down in a snowstorm, he fixed her transmission for free because he knew she needed to get to the hospital. He didn't ask for equity. He didn't ask for a press release. He just did it. I pointed to my mother. This is Rosser. She manages a diner. She has spent the last 10 years packing leftover food every single night to give to the homeless shelter on 4th Street. She doesn't call it charity. She calls it being a neighbor. I looked at Leaner and my sister Leaner. She works 2 jobs to pay for her nursing degree so she doesn't have to ask anyone for a loan. The room was silent. I could see the shame on the faces of a few guests, the ones who had laughed at Trevor's speech. I had forced them to look at my family not as props, not as punchlines, but as human beings who possessed more integrity in their little fingers than this entire room had in its bank accounts. I turned slowly to face Elaine. She was gripping the tablecloth, her knuckles white. "Now, let me tell you what my new mother-in-law thinks of them," I said. I raised the microphone closer to my lips. "I am not letting your poor family humiliate my son at his own wedding." I let the words hang there. That is a direct quote. I told the crowd. That is what Elaine Ashford said to me 3 hours ago, while she blocked the door and forced me to sign a legal document. She is lying. Elaine shrieked, standing up. She is hysterical. Cut the microphone. "Don't bother," I said. Naomi, standing at the audiovisual booth, hit the space bar. The massive screen behind the head table, which was supposed to show a montage of our romantic courtship, flickered. The image of us kissing in Paris disappeared. In its place, shaky but high-definition video footage appeared. It was Elaine. She was standing in the bridal suite, her face twisted in a sneer. "I am not letting your poor family humiliate my son at his own wedding." The video Elaine spat out, her voice amplified through the concert-grade speakers. "We are cutting the rope so you can float." The ballroom erupted. A collective gasp swept through the room like a physical wave. Hands flew to mouths. Phones were raised, recording the screen. "Turn it off," Colin yelled, knocking over his chair. "Trevor, kill the power." "We are not done," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. The screen changed again. This time it was a document. The font was large and legible. Section 12, Reputational Harm and Family Conduct. "This is the contract they made me sign," I narrated, walking toward the edge of the stage. "It states that if my family embarrasses the brand, I lose everything. But why were they so worried about the brand?" Naomi hit play on the audio file. "Just let them be natural." Colin's voice boomed over the speakers, accompanied by his cold, dry laugh. "The internet will do the rest." Then the morality clause kicks in. We divorce 6 months post-IPO. I keep the capital and she walks away with nothing. I looked at Colin. He was frozen. His face had gone the color of ash. The investors at Table 1 were staring at him with open hostility. They weren't looking at a charming CEO anymore. They were looking at a liability. He called my family a risk to brand equity. I said to the room, "But the real risk wasn't my father's suit. It was your accounting department." "That is enough." Colin roared. He lunged toward me, his eyes wild. "Give me that microphone, you crazy." He never reached me. The double doors of the ballroom crashed open with a sound like thunder. Federal agents. A voice screamed, "Nobody move. Hands where we can see them." Monica Hale strode into the room wearing an FBI windbreaker, her badge gleaming under the chandeliers. Behind her, a dozen agents in tactical gear poured in, their presence instantly turning the wedding of the year into a federal raid. Colin Ashford, Elaine Ashford, Trevor Lang, Monica Bart pointing at the head. "You are being detained under suspicion of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." The room dissolved into pandemonium. Guests were screaming. Waiters dropped trays of champagne. The string quartet looked terrified, clutching their instruments. Agents swarmed the head table. I watched as they pulled Trevor's laptop, the one with the illegal pitch deck still open, into an evidence bag. Colin was backed against the wall. "This is a mistake. My lawyer will have your badge." "This is a setup." "It is not a mistake, Colin," a voice said from the crowd. Mason Reed stepped forward. The young accountant looked small, surrounded by the chaos. But he held his head high. He walked up to Monica Hale and handed her a black hard drive. "This is the real ledger," Mason said, his voice shaking but clear. "It shows the round tripping. It shows the shell companies. I backed it up 3 days ago just in case my conscience won." I looked at Mason and nodded. He gave me a weak, relieved smile. I turned back to Colin. 2 agents were pulling his hands behind his back. The zip ties made a sharp zip sound that was louder than any vow he had spoken. I walked up to him. I stood toe-to-toe with the man who had promised to save me. "You wanted me to choose," I said softly. "You wanted me to choose between you and my poor family. Well, I chose." I reached for my left hand. I pulled off the massive diamond engagement ring. It felt like removing a shackle. "Here," I said, dropping the ring into his breast pocket. "You are going to need this for your legal defense fund." "You ruined my life," Colin hissed, spit flying from his lips. "You are my wife. You can't testify against me. Spousal privilege." I laughed. It was a genuine bubbling laugh of pure freedom. "Oh, Colin," I said, leaning in close so he wouldn't miss a word. "That is the best part. I went to the county clerk yesterday morning. I withdrew the application. The marriage license was never filed." His eyes went wide. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "I am not your wife," I whispered. "I am just the whistleblower. You lost your IPO and your bride in the same day. And looking at the charges, you are not getting a refund on either. Get him out of here," Monica ordered as the agents dragged Colin and a screaming Elaine toward the exit. Elaine dug her heels into the carpet. "You can't do this," she shrieked, looking at the venue owner, Walter Witt, who was standing near the security team. "Walter, kick her out. She is trespassing. This is my event. I paid the deposit." Walter Whitlow stepped forward. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, the addendum I had signed that morning. "Actually, Mrs. Ashford," Walter said, his voice cool and professional, "according to the contract addendum signed at 9 this morning, all vendor payments were guaranteed by Ms. Race personally. She is the client of record." He gestured to the clause. "And as per our harassment policy, any guest causing distress to the client must be removed." Henderson, the head of security, the same man Elaine had ordered to block my parents, stepped forward with a grim smile. "Let's go, ma'am," Henderson said, taking Elaine's arm firmly. "You are disturbing the party." The guests watched in stunned silence as the Ashford dynasty was dragged out the side door, past the kitchen, past the dumpsters, and into the back of police cruisers. The door swung shut. The sirens faded into the distance. I stood alone on the dance floor. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I looked at the crowd, the investors, the socialites, the people who had judged me for 3 years. They looked terrified. They didn't know if they should leave or applaud. I raised the microphone one last time. "I am sorry about the interruption," I said. "The wedding is officially canceled." I paused. I looked at my mom, who was crying happy tears. I looked at my dad, who was holding a glass of the good wine now. But I smiled. The bill is paid. The bar is open. The food is hot. And I don't know about you, but I am starving. I kicked off my white satin heels. They flew across the floor and landed near the head table. "If you want to leave, the exits are open," I said. "But if you want to stay and celebrate a woman who didn't sell her soul today, then grab a drink." I turned to the DJ. "Play something with a beat, something loud, something from my neighborhood." The DJ grinned. He dropped the needle. The heavy bass of a regatta track shook the crystal chandeliers. The stiff, frozen atmosphere shattered. My cousins ran onto the dance floor. My dad grabbed my mom and spun her around. I saw a few of the investors hesitate. Then, one by one, they loosened their ties. They walked over to the Ryers' table. They picked up glasses. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Naomi. She handed me a tequila shot. "To Section 12, she shouted over the music. "To Section 12, I yelled back. We drank. The burn was magnificent. I ran into the center of the circle my family had formed. I danced barefoot on the expensive hardwood, my dress swirling around me, sweat sticking my hair to my neck. I wasn't the perfect bride. I wasn't the risk analyst. I was just Quinn. The day I threw the groom out of the wedding but kept my family, I lost a packaged future. I lost the mansion and the status. But as I spun around laughing until my sides itched, realizing that nobody was watching me with judgment anymore, I knew the truth. I had lost a fortune, but I had won my life back. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a wild ride, and I am so glad I could share the truth with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to Azad Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need to hear it. Stay strong and always read the fine print.